Hello friends and welcome to Fire Emblem Discussion. Today I wanted to do a tier list on which games in Fire Emblem are easy to get into for beginners. Because some of the games are a little more cryptic than others, and some of the games are harder to just play without knowing much of anything before going into it. So really this list is for people who've maybe played Three Houses, maybe they've played Just Awakening and Fates in Three Houses or something like that, and they want to play some of the older games in the series. Or maybe you're brand new to the series and you don't know where to start. So, let's get into it. We're going to go game by game, including the spin-offs. So, first we have Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, which is FE1. It's the first game in the series. And we're going to put that straight into NES tier, which is just... The NES games are both really hard to get into. I'll throw Gaiden in there as well, which is Fire Emblem 2 or Fire Emblem Gaiden. They're just really hard to get into just because it's the UI or the user interface is really rough. It does a really bad job of explaining how to play the game, if at all. Like, it feels like these games were supposed to be played with manuals that they came with. I've actually never seen one though. If you have a link to like some scans of an FE1 or FE2 manual, I would be totally down to take a look at it. So post that in the comments. But aside from that, don't start with these games. Please don't. Okay, next we have Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem, which is a remake of FE1 and a completely new story. It's separated into Book 1 and Book 2, and you can skip Book 1 and just play Book 2 if you want, and really they're connected stories, and they use the same characters and everything. It's the Marth story, you know. But, like, you know, there's no carryover in, like, character stats or levels or promotion or anything like that between Book 1 and Book 2. So you play Book 1, it's its own story, and then you can move on and play Book 2, it's its own story, or you can just play Book 2, whatever you want to do. I'm going to say, though, that this game is pretty hard to start with. Also does a really bad job of explaining anything to you. This game was definitely meant to be played with a guide, and by guide I mean just like the little pamphlet that used to come with video games, you know? I feel like this game would have really benefited from having that, and you know, obviously we're in English, you're not going to have that. I mean, if you have the original Japanese and you can get that pamphlet or whatever, then maybe it's great, but as far as I know, with my experience, it's a hard one to start with. I will say the same thing about Genealogy of the Holy War, which is also for the Super Nintendo, or the Super Famicom rather. Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, which is for the Super Nintendo. It has a really great story and a lot going for it that way, like narratively and everything, and a lot of people would praise it as the best story in the series, which I think I don't know, maybe it's a little overrated. But gameplay-wise, there's a lot of things it doesn't explain very well. Even with the newer translation patch, the Project Naga patch, which is really good, it just doesn't explain the game well enough, you know? And I would say it's a very hard game to start with. Next, we'll move on to Fire Emblem Thracia 776, and if you guys know anything about the series or this game, you know it's going to go and hard to start with. It is not the game to start with. It has tons of just kind of out there mechanics and a lot of out there recruitments for characters, things that are pretty hard to know and understand, and I would suggest playing a few of the other games in the series before tackling this one. And more than anything, Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War should be played first, because Thracia 776 or FE5 is a mid-quel, sequel, prequel. You need to play the games to really understand what I mean by that. But play Genealogy of the Holy War first, and then play FE5. But yeah, don't start with it. Don't start with that game. If you play Three Houses, don't start with that one. Now we're getting into the more modern style of Fire Emblems. So we got Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, which is for the Game Boy Advance. And I would say that it is okay to start with this game. It is easy enough to get into. It doesn't have a whole lot of crazy mechanics that you're not going to understand. It's a pretty basic game. And I would argue that here is where modern Fire Emblem, or I don't know, like kind of like the mid-modern-ish Fire Emblem stuff started to really take shape and really take form. This is the first game after Shozu Kago left, who was the creator of the series, and they definitely played it pretty safe with Fire Emblem The Blading Blade, or FE6, and I think it's a fine one to start with if you really want to. But I don't think it's as good as the next one, Fire Emblem 7, which here in America is just called Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance, but it's like tagline, or it's whatever it's called. It's Fire Emblem: The Blazing Sword, or Blazing Blade, as they've decided to call it more recently, which is actually a prequel to Binding Blade. But it doesn't matter which order you play them in, because this one was made first, so it's obviously like okay to play the sequel / not prequel first, but the prequel is great to play first. The prequel, or Fire Emblem 7, comes with a full-blown tutorial, perfect for new players of the series. It can feel a little tedious at times. It's the first 10 chapters of the game. It really holds your hand, but it really settles you in and leaves no questions unanswered. You're going to know how to play the game after playing those first 10 chapters. So if you are brand new to the series, you've only played 3 houses, and you want to get into the older games, FE7 is a great place to go. FE7 is a great place to go. Next, I would argue as well, FE8 is a good place to go to start the series. It's a little less hand-holdy than FE7, but it still holds your hand enough to where you're not going to feel lost at all if you're new to the series. So check this one out as well. There's also, if you've played Awakening, it's pretty similar to that. It has like a map. It has side like monster battles and stuff for you to do to grind experience, whatever else. So it's not a bad place to start. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, I would argue, is an even better place to start than FE8. So Fire Emblem Path of Radiance for the GameCube. It is super expensive. It's really hard to find a copy for a reasonable price. There are, alternative means to play it, but it is a fantastic game to start with. If you play it on easy mode or normal mode, there's these really good guides and tutorials that will ask you if you want to watch them, and it does a really good job of it. Has a little cutscene to come up, and it shows you how to play the game. Explains it very well, very thorough. You will know how to play the game if you watch those guides. There'll be no questions. It answers everything you need to know, and it is a great place to start. Unlike the next game, which I struggle to put it in okay to start with or hard to start with, mainly because it is the sequel to Path of Radiance, and for that reason I'm going to put it in hard to start with. Because it is the sequel, I mean, you really should play Path of Radiance first if you want to get the full effect of the story. Radiant Dawn is its own standalone story to an extent, but there are some key plot elements in Path of Radiance that you'll want to see before playing Radiant Dawn, especially once you get to the latter half of the game. So Radiant Dawn, hard to start with for story reasons, but I think gameplay it's fine. Some people will say it's pretty hard, but if you play it on easy or normal, it is a pretty forgiving experience. Next we have Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, and I would argue that this is also a great place to start. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon is a remake of FE1 of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, so it follows the story of our friend Marth, who does some stuff to kill the evil dragon, all that different stuff, Fire Emblem stuff, all the important Fire Emblem stuff you do. Get special sword, kill dragon. Did it. That's a Fire Emblem story. And also, if you play on the easiest difficulty, will allow you to play the prologue chapters, the prologue chapters, which serve as a great tutorial. They allow you to get some experience on your units before even starting the game, so you get a little bit of a head start on the easier difficulty if you'd like. And it's just like the original story. It is close to the purest form of Fire Emblem you'll get, aside from the reclassing system, which is the first time reclassing was ever in the series. You can actually change any unit's class to a class in their class set, and you can have the crazy team of, you can make freaking Cain and Abel. Once they promote, you can make them into Wyvern riders and stuff. So it's really fun. You can really change up the game on later playthroughs. But as for beginners, I'm going to put it pretty high up here. I'm actually going to put it above Path of Radiance. Next we have Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem Heroes of Light and Shadow, if that's how, I think that's the subtitle for it. I'm going to put this in hard to start with. This game isn't very forgiving. It is a tough game. It does have a prologue similar to FE1 that allows you to earn some experience on a couple of your characters, especially your main character, who is an avatar. The first game to introduce an avatar. But this game is also a sequel. It's a sequel to Shadow Dragon. It is actually a remake of Book 2 in Mystery of the Emblem. And yeah, it's not too bad. It has a lot of difficulty settings you can do. The smallest one isn't too hard to get into. And honestly, I'm tempted to put it into okay to start with as well. But I think I'm going to leave it in hard to start with. Not because of difficulty as much as for story reasons, and that Shadow Dragon is honestly just a better place to start. Next we have Awakening. I'm going to put this up here. It is great for beginners. I'm going to put it, again, I'm going to put this one right. I'm going to put it right there. Most of these, the orders don't matter, but in the great for beginners, I'm trying to put them in some sort of semblance of a ranking. I think Fire Emblem Awakening is a fine place to start. It introduces you to the game very well, especially if you play on lower difficulties. There's a lot of good tutorials. It's the first introduction. It's lies. It has casual mode. I was going to say it's the first introduction of casual mode, but I don't think it is. I'm pretty sure that's a new mystery. But anyways, it has casual mode, which is really easy for beginners. If your unit dies, they don't die forever. So if you're worried about losing units, that's a good place to go. And yeah, it's closer to Three Houses than any of these games here in terms of gameplay, I would argue. So Awakening is not a bad place to go. There's infinite grinding, especially if you use the spot pass battles. You can just grind for days. So Fire Emblem Awakening is not a bad place to go if you have played Three Houses or haven't played a single game with the series and you just want to start somewhere. Okay, now we have the three Fates games. Fire Emblem Fates, Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation. And these three are interesting. It's hard to say which ones were okay to start with and which ones aren't. Right off the bat, I'll tell you, don't start with Revelation. You'll definitely want to play at least Birthright or Conquest first. So I'm going to say it's a hard to start with game. Birthright, I'm going to put in... It's very similar to Awakening in that there's like endless grinding, and it's a beginner-friendly experience. They even added a new mode in Fates called Phoenix mode, where if a unit dies, they literally just come back the next turn. So there's like literally no risk. You can just like do suicide strats and stuff, which is kind of goofy. But I think it's a fine place to start with. And Conquest, I'm gonna say it is an okay game to start with. It isn't great to start here. It has some difficult moments, but it still has Phoenix mode, casual mode. It is not too hard to get into. Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia is going to go into okay to start with. So Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia is a remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden. And it's very, very faithful to the game. If you like the exploration of the monastery and everything and moving around in a 3D environment with your characters in Three Houses, then Echoes is the closest thing you're going to get to that. It is not, honestly, the difficulty is pretty low. There's endless grinding. You can do anything you need to grind and everything. But it just has some weird mechanics, and I would say that you should play any of these games before it. Just so, I don't know, it just has some weird things about it that aren't traditional Fire Emblem. And, yeah. But if you have played Three Houses, this is probably the closest experience to that. It has voice acting and everything. And now, spin-offs. I'm just going to put all the spin-offs in spin-off. Heroes is a fine place to start, honestly, if you haven't played a single Fire Emblem game. I don't think it has the same appeal if you don't know all the characters and stuff, though, but to each their own. Warriors was fun. I honestly haven't played Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and I don't know if I ever will, but that's a game. And Three Houses, I would argue, if you haven't played a single game in the series, I'm going to say Three Houses is a fine place to start with. I'm having a hard time ranking it here. I'm going to put it above Birthright, but below Sacred Stones. There's so much going on in Three Houses, and if you've never played a Fire Emblem game, and especially if you've never played a strategy game or a tactical RPG, then Three Houses can be a bit overwhelming. But nevertheless, I'm sure many of you have experienced thus far. It's a perfectly fine place just to start and play the game. Pretty easy difficulty. It's not the hardest game in the world. You'll be able to do it. And yeah, it's a fun time. It's a fun time. So there you go, friends. Here is my tier list for which games to start with in the series or which games to go to after you've played Three Houses. So let me know in the comments what you think of this tier list, and maybe give me some of your own tier thoughts, like where games should have been in this tier list and where they should have been moved to, or if they're in the perfect spot, whatever. I want to know what you have to say. And of course, as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more Fire Emblem discussion. And if you haven't checked it out yet, go check out my Patreon page, where you can join some private Discord areas. You can suggest a video topic, suggest games for streams, and also get some Patreon exclusive content, specifically a podcast that I'm going to be putting up weekly. So check that out.